time for another Podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Oh, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another Podcast by George. Got a favorite of mine on today, folks. It's the preeminent, the doctor, the doc politics is coming back on the show, Steffen W. Schmidt. We're going to get to him very shortly. I wanted to cover a couple of things right off the top here, because they're just head shakers, they're jaw droppers, they're really important or significant. Maybe starting with this one. I know a lot of people here in the state of Iowa are following this. After Iowa Supreme Court rebuke Kim Reynolds, the Kingfisher, I call her. She settled an open records lawsuit for $175,000. I'm not going to get real deep into the weeds on this, but Governor Kim Reynolds is settling 3 lawsuits from journalists and others seeking public records after losing a key Iowa Supreme Court case this spring, agreeing to pay $175,000. We look at that and think, well, okay, that's, boy, that's going to hit the old pocketbook pretty good there with Kim Reynolds. No, it's going to hit our pocketbook, folks. The state auditor, Rob Sand, jumped up immediately and says, "Oh my, this is coming out. They ought to change this law." And he's all up with it. And I think he's pursuing it. But when she does this, when she sets taxpayer money on fire like this, we pay for it. So we sue to get the information that she's withholding. The great Laura Bellin has been on my show, and sometimes this stuff is withheld for years, for God's sake. And then we pay for it with our own money. Now, I've already had somebody, before I went on the air, point out, and, there'd be an MMT person that would tell you modern monetary theory will tell you on the federal level that it's not taxpayers' money at all. This is state money that we're talking about here. And even if it isn't, however you want to look at it with MMT and that type of thing, it's money that could be used somewhere else for some other goodly purpose, instead of for this nefarious reason that the Kingfish has, and then we pay for it. My God, follow that story. Now, I'm going to have either Randy Evans and or Laura Bellin on very shortly to talk about this more in depth. But to take a quick spin through some of the news of the day, and it goes along with how we promoted the show. Here's this from the DNR posting test reports. And this is interesting. It's an eye-opener, not only in the information, but the way it's being reported. Now, look at this. If your holiday weekend plans, including taking a dip at one of Iowa's swimming beaches, and man, I am all up with that. My God, it's recreational. It's good for your health. It's free if it's at a public beach. All of these things are great. Well, make sure to check water quality first. What? Why? Yeah. Swimming is currently not recommended at 6 of Iowa's beaches, and 2 more are closed due to maintenance. Okay. Not recommended at 6 beaches. Why not? Because it will make you sick. It'll make your dog die. They don't tell it to you in that context, but that's why it's not recommended, folks. A little deeper in the story, it says, what causes contamination at Iowa's beaches? Fecal contamination of beach water can happen due to improperly constructed and operated septic systems. Well, yeah, it can. According to DNR officials, that's not the number one reason, folks. What's that listed first for? As well as sewage treatment plants. Yeah, that's not the number one reason, though. That's manure spills, stormwater runoff from lands with public, wildlife and pet droppings. No, the main reason for this is runoff from fields that have manure on them, or runoff or water affluent that is escaping from CAFOs. That's where this contamination comes from. We're swimming in degraded pig manure, basically, in the state. Why is it reported like this? Lands with wildlife and pet droppings, or direct contamination from waterfowl. This is this goose thing that you hear all the time. This is what the people that want to defend big ag will tell you, that the reason that we can't drink our water, the reason that we can't swim in it, the reason the dog can't go in it is because of goose droppings. That isn't it. Livestock or small children in the water. Are you kidding me? I mean, a lake. Why would you even mention it? Why would you report it that way? You got to have your eyes wide open, folks. You got to look at every word. You know that from watching Podcast by George. All right, so let's get to the big thing that's happening right now. Well, they're all big, but air quality in Iowa reaches unprecedented levels. Smoke drifting in from Canadian wildfires prompts advisories for much of the state, much of the country, folks. Much of Iowa was blanketed with haze this week as smoke from Canadian wildfires filtered into the state, causing unprecedented air quality indices, according to the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. I've never seen anything like it, and I'm getting old. Advisories were in effect through Wednesday, with eastern Iowa hit with some of the worst air quality in the Midwest. Cedar Rapids saw its air quality index rise to 267 Tuesday afternoon. That's the highest in the state in CR. The air quality index in Iowa City as of Wednesday morning was at a very unhealthy level of 224, according to the Environmental Protection Agency's airnow.gov, down from a high of 247 the day prior. Central Iowa was listed as very unhealthy Wednesday morning, but improved to unhealthy by the noon hour. Oh, that's good. Now, AirNow, home of the U.S. Air Quality Index, recommended residents limit or avoid physical activity outdoors. Get this, stay inside and use air conditioning. Of course, that's also what's killing us, folks, but prolonged exposure to such irritants can cause headache, irritate eyes, fatigue, difficulty breathing, chest pains, coughing, and even asthma attacks, according to the Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management. Now, in the 24 years that Todd Russell has tracked excessive air quality readings for the Iowa Department of Natural Resources, he has never seen the levels inhaled by Iowans this week, calling it unprecedented in both the extent and the longevity. Get this, quote, possibly fireworks are about the only thing that's been this high. Yeah, I've seen it worse with fireworks. My God, it's a fog of gun smoke sometimes in my neighborhood around the 4th of July. And of course, with fireworks, it's short time, but they're still going to blow them off, folks. And there is the promo for today's show. We're going to get to it after that open. Dense smoke and politicians with Dr. Politics. And you can kind of see the smoke in the background. I kind of like that promo, but the point, the reason that I put that up there was I was trying to determine who was denser. What was denser, I guess, the politicians or the smoke? Well, let me take that off on screen. Let me bring this up and introduce our guest, Steffen W. Schmidt. He's Dr. Politics, folks. He's earned a PhD in public law and government from Columbia University. He's a founding and sustaining member of LULAC Council 307 in Iowa. He was born and grew up in Columbia. He's the author of 10 books, co-author of American Government and Politics Today. It's in its 19th or 20th edition. He's the author of many articles and columns on Latin America, U.S. issues, cyber threats, the politics of disruption, women in politics. And of course, he's a frequent political commentator of American and international media worldwide. He is the Lucan Endowed Professor Emeritus of Political Science from Iowa State University. So let me put that away. Let me click this button here and let me scroll down here a little bit and bring him in and say good morning to our good buddy, our good pal, Dr. Politics. Doc, if anybody ever asks you why I read that, kind of a long form bio each time, at the end here, and we're getting close to it, both you and I are, the bio is all that remains, and it's called a tombstone. So I'm trying to do a little better than that when I introduce the guests on the show, because that's all that's going to be left, and how quickly we're going to be getting there may be determined by climate, war, and healthcare, and we're going to be talking about that with you today. Good morning, Doc.
Or animal runoff in the lakes if we go swimming and get it in our mouth.
Yeah.
It's always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much. And almost everything that you said about me is true.
And some things will be left unsaid about the doc and about me, particularly. Okay, let's jump into it here, because time is always limited, and we seem to run out of time when we talk to the doc. This first story I wanted to get to is something that he's really well acquainted with, because he spent 50 years in the university classrooms teaching political science to students. And you probably heard, this is reporting now from Reuters, what the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action means for colleges. colleges and universities. From yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down race-conscious policies in college admissions, ending decades of precedent that had allowed schools nationwide to use such programs to increase the diversity of their student bodies. Okay, Doc, you and I haven't talked about this a lot, but what's your take on affirmative action and on the Supreme Court decision yesterday?
Well, the takeaway, not just from that decision, but also from the decision today, that, if you are a web designer and you're a Christian, you have the right now, as a result of today's Supreme Court decision, to deny people, if they want you to create a website that disagrees with your religious beliefs, you can say, no, I'm sorry, I don't do that. And the same with Roe v. Wade, the abortion decision, women's right to choose, etc. The Supreme Court is important. Elections matter. If you don't go and vote and, somebody becomes president and they have enough votes in the Senate to confirm Supreme Court justices, the Supreme Court is potentially will reverse decisions. The takeaway, George, is there is no such thing basically as permanence in the law. Settled law does not exist. My colleagues in political science always disagree with me on this. Oh, no, it's settled law. No, it's not settled law. Law is whatever at a certain point in time, the regime in power who has the majority of votes or the Supreme Court decides is the law and is correct. And the Supreme Court right now is giving a lot of judgments to people who did not like the decisions that were made by the courts or by Congress in some cases before. And it's a democracy, or, it's a constitutional government. And people have the right to vote, and they vote for people that they think will pass laws that make them comfortable. You can't go around yelling and screaming about all of this. If you don't like what the Supreme Court is doing or Congress is doing, then go out and vote for somebody else. But, that's how it works. And affirmative action is not going to disappear. Colleges and universities will continue to try to have a very diverse student body with women, with international students, with nowadays, with students from the rural areas and small towns, and urban students, and rich students and poor students. And they really, when I was a professor at Iowa State, we didn't really admit students who were just not university material because we knew they would flunk out. So we admitted students that looked interesting. And in some cases, they were Latino students. In some cases, they were Black. In some cases, they were actually conservative students. I had a lot of conservative students in my classes. People think the universities, are stacked against conservative. I remember when Donald Trump started running for president, there was a whole group in my American government class who some of them had laptops with big Trump for president stickers on the back. So we've always had, an effort to have a lot of interesting students, and universities are still going to look for really interesting Black students and Hispanic students and students with disabilities. And, don't take that away from them. That's, you go out there in American society, in Iowa or anywhere else, and it's a fruit salad of a lot of different people. And we want that to be reflected in the university, because when you leave the university, you're going to have to work with those folks, and we want them to feel comfortable with that. So yes, using race as a major criterion for admitting a student is now not going to be easy or constitutional, but universities will still be looking for really interesting students, and hopefully a good percentage of those will be Black students and other diverse students.
Yeah, and from my perspective, because of the issues that confront us, a lot of which we're going to be talking about today, I'm let them all in. Now, means test them academically, obviously, but I'm not for withholding or keeping anybody out of a university right now because of income or because of money. And I also look at it from a repatriation standpoint, particularly with the African American population. Affirmative action was a very kind of small, different way of looking at that. But if that's being taken away, that no longer exists. Now, I wanted to get to the. Let me see what else I've got here with this article.
Yeah.
It states what is affirmative action. Now, the doc talked about this quite a bit in the context of higher education. Affirmative action typically refers to admissions policies aimed at increasing the number of Black, Hispanic, and other minority students on campus. Colleges and universities that take race into consideration have said they do so as part of a holistic approach. And that's what the doc was talking about. That reviews every aspect of an application, including grades, test scores, and extracurricular activities. I think there's way too much emphasis on the extracurricular, but that's just me. What will colleges do in response? The decision on Thursday will force elite colleges and universities to revamp their policies and search for new ways to ensure diversity in their student populations. Many schools have said other measures would not be as effective, resulting in fewer minority students on campus. Here's something that I have a little bit of experience with in my own family, Doc, and it's related, but it's a little bit different. It's legacy admissions and scholarships. The Supreme Court and President Biden is taking aim at legacy admissions. This is from the Harvard Crimson. Legacy admissions are under renewed scrutiny followed the Supreme Court's decision to dramatically curtail the use of race in college admissions. Okay, so I looked at that and I thought, okay, for people don't know, that means if you went to a university and graduated, I think your offspring can get a discount, maybe not a big one, but somewhat of a break on their own admission. Well, I looked at that and I thought, is that going to happen? Because to me, that is a huge deal for these universities, because you look at these factions like University of Iowa versus Iowa State and that type of thing. There are people that bleed black and gold, red and crimson and gold, or whatever it is. I really run around with this stuff on their bumper stickers and cars and all that. Hell, when they die, Doc, they bequeath their estate to the football team. I mean, they're crazy about this. Well, the way that promulgates generationally, to a certain degree, I would think, are these legacy scholarships. I don't see those going away. That strikes right at the heart of, my school, your school, my team, your team with the American universities. What do you think about the legacy thing?
I think you're right. And again, let me repeat, I've never in my 50 years at Iowa State and my 3 years at Long Island University before that, seen students whose parents or maybe grandparents went to the school and who sometimes they just give them additional points for admission rather than a discount. They just admit them by giving them extra points over others. I don't remember any who were really stupid and should not have been admitted. I know we've had some students who were not qualified, who were not legacy students, but they were admitted. And eventually, sadly enough, flunked out no matter how hard we tried. So it's all a culture war. It's a culture war. Everybody thinks that legacy students are students from really super rich people from Harvard or, New York bankers and stuff like that. And that's not true. The legacy students at Iowa State are often the kids or grandchildren of my neighbor, a farmer somewhere, who get in because they love the university, they're committed to it. Maybe their family gave the university money for a building or a sports facility or scholarships in some cases. I mean, a lot of scholarships are given by people who graduated, loved their university, put them in the will, and said, I want other students to be able to come, and this money is for scholarships. It's not for the football team or basketball team or whatever. So, we got to be careful when we sort of overemphasize the negativity of certain things that have a bad reputation. And that negativity comes mostly, frankly, from the left. Sorry to tell you that, George.
Well, I get it. And on this issue too, I look at it and I think one of the biggest problems with the legacy program is it builds upon the status quo. You're not getting the new material. You're getting the same people, the same families that are coming and rising to the top and getting first shot, best shot at succeeding and controlling the country. But that is changing a little bit. It has to do with the emphasis that you're talking about. They're now emphasizing employers are community colleges and other service as much as they are the college degree. When I was a kid, if you had a college degree, you got hired immediately and you went right to the top because they were kind of rare among the general population. Now that's since changed and it's not quite the same way, but unfortunately my experience is, again, talking as a lefty, Doc, is we're overemphasizing military service. I think when it comes to the civilian jobs, particularly in law enforcement, fire departments, and that type of thing, I would like to see all of these emphases change, and I don't know that they're changing for the better. But you mentioned the left wing. Okay, I gotta move on here because I want to get to the real reason I had the Doc on was, and I want to show this. He's got a Substack now, and you can follow Steffen W. Schmidt on Substack at steffenschmidt.substack.com. You can see it on screen there, folks. There's the URL, the web address, anyway, that you go to. And I thought this was very interesting because I didn't see this reported a lot. I didn't follow this story quite as closely as maybe some of the wonks did, but it was about this Prigozhin dude versus Putin. And you say, what's really happening? And this is the Schmidt Chronicles. Go to Substack and follow Doc Politics there. The Wagner Group is a for-profit mercenary contracting group owned by Prigozhin. It's a brand that's winning conflicts. In Ukraine, that reputation was at risk. Wagner fighters were not supported by Russian troops nor by the Russian command. Now, I heard some reporting on that. This is where it gets interesting. I wanted to get your take or get you to expand upon this a little bit, Doc. You say, I think Prigozhin may now terminate the Wagner Ukraine operations, move his forces to Africa again, where he has lucrative contracts, and stay on the move to avoid SB assassins from Putin. Without Wagner, these sources were the most successful, and that's important. These forces were the most successful. Putin may need to wrap up the Ukraine war, blame the war's failure on Prigozhin, and cut his losses. Well, I kind of like the sound of that, Doc, but I guess I wanted you to expand upon it a little bit and tell me that that's not just wishful thinking. Is that a possibility?
Well, I think it is a possibility. Now we're seeing something that was unexpected, which is that Prigozhin supposedly is in a neighboring country, and the troops are disbanding, but many of them are going there to basically to an abandoned Air Force base or military base where they're maybe going to be training. So it's a muddled picture, but the bottom line of it is that for Prigozhin, apparently, the Ukraine war was not something he thought was a good idea. He did not think that Putin should have launched that war. Ukraine was not, strategically very important. It was not threatening Russia in any way. And he did see his own credibility, the brand of his particular services, which is the Wagner Group, threatened by the fact that they were not succeeding the way they have in other places like Syria and Africa. So I'm thinking that he's very careful, because I think Putin is not very happy with what happened there, him marching on Moscow, although he did call it all off. But I think he's going to move on to something else. The Ukraine war, to me at least, is not a really great thing for anybody. It's not great for Russia. It's not great for Wagner. Certainly not great for Ukraine and for Europe to have that, fire burning right there, so close to all the European countries. So at some point, somebody is going to say, why are we doing this? This is costing us billions and billions of rubles and dollars and many, many, many lives. It's undermining the reputation of Russia and its credibility. It's even now undermining, Putin's reputation as a smart and tough guy, as Donald Trump said. I don't think he was a very smart guy to invade Ukraine. And I think we'll see. This is such a moving target, or a moving scenario. But it is possible, that without Wagner, the Russian military operations are just going to stagnate. They were the ones who were, really scoring a lot of points, although not really winning, but they were holding the line.
They're the bloodthirsty mercenaries. We've got ours as well. That are good at it and seem to like it. The thing that struck me.
Well, war is hell. If you get into a war, a lot of people are going to suffer. That's, there's no nice war.
Yeah. I was going to say the thing that struck me about that, reading into it and reading your Substack, it reminded me of a theme, something that you talk about all the time. And it has to do with Russia, and it has to do with the United States. And this Prigozhin guy was a good example of it. And it's be careful what you wish for. Mm-hmm. I mean, you may not like Putin, and nobody does. He ought to be up in front of the Nuremberg tribunal for war crimes, obviously. But there are worse people, believe it or not, in Russia than Putin. This guy might be one of them. Mm-hmm. And so this is the kind of big change that can occur, and you may not want it. And it brings me to the next Substack article that I want to bring up here. This is something that you stated very eloquently about this country. You said we need big political change. What risks do we take? And just to back up a second, what the doc was talking about in Russia, what'll bring Putin down? It won't be electorally. I mean, he's very strong in the opinion polls in Russia. I think the dude could be reelected for ad infinitum. What'll bring him down is if this war causes a depression. And that's how we got the New Deal, the big change here in the United States, or and the war itself and the body count gets so bad. And Russia can tolerate a lot more than we can, it seems like, with military losses, but gets so bad that the people rise up and put an end to the war like they did in Vietnam, because that's really what ended the war here. I mean, they cut off the money for the funding of it. That's what my dad always used to tell me, but it was because the pro-war faction was seeing the kids on their block come home in a box. More importantly, because we tend to do things that affect us personally. They were afraid their own kids were going to be coming home in a box. So they finally put an end to the war here in this country, the Vietnam War. And that could happen to Putin as well, because the body count is horrific. But let's talk more about this country, because I really like this. It says, you wrote in Substack, I have friends who believe the Democratic and Republican parties are the same, oligarch controlled and bad for most Americans. They think only big change brought about by a robust third party can make America much better. Well, I used to think that. I'm beginning to wonder a little bit, because it ain't worked so far, but we'll talk about that a little bit more. In the United States, if you don't like the deep state, the FBI, cops, the CIA, DOD, Justice Department, IRS, the Supreme Court, NSA, DIA, and others, there's hope for a change. Doc put that litany together for a purpose, folks. Donald Trump and the MAGA Republicans don't like them either. The fastest change would be for them to win the next election bigly. Well, I would say Trump never really follows through or is capable of doing most of what he promises, but they will replace or redirect all these deep state organizations, but who knows with what? It may not be your idea of good change. Remember what we were talking about? Be careful what you wish for. Conversely, the Republicans also need to reflect on what might replace the existing government agencies they hate so much. They only hate him when they're turned against them. But they mock Biden for being old and weak. And man, is he. Holy cow. I saw some stuff again just this week. It ain't looking good for Joe. But what if a younger, very strong and tough Democrat won election and implements big change? he or she could amp up the current agencies and make them much more aggressive, threatening, even dangerous. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to put that away, but the little closer is pretty good too. But Doc, I mean, I know this is a reoccurring theme for you, and it goes all the way back to your childhood, really, because you've seen worse. It is bad, but it can get worse.
Yeah, I grew up in Colombia as a kid, and we went through every kind of political crap that you can imagine, and it often went from bad to worse. And when it got really, really bad, as you pointed out, and the country was in a complete civil war, 300,000 dying in a civil war that was brutal, then the elites got really worried because it looked like it was going to be dangerous for them. And they got together and they formed a unity government, coalition government between the Liberal and Conservative Party, and stopped the Civil War. At least, things didn't get much better, but the Civil War started, and they realized that basically sicking their people against the other side was a very, very risky thing to do. And I think to some extent we are facing that option here, and we saw it with the protests and the invasion of the Congress. Things can get really bad, and people get so inflamed and furious that they take matters into their own hands. And it might be a weather man or woman on a TV channel who talks about climate change, who all of a sudden begins to get massive hate mail, death threats, and other things from somebody who thinks that they have the right to shut down a reporter on a weather channel.
A weatherman, for God's sake.
Oh, yeah, weatherman.
That's unbelievable. I told people on my Facebook page, and I shared this with a doc, Chris Cloninger was on my show. The reason I had him on the show was because he does this. He frames things in the context of climate change, which I think they should be. I mean, it should be the first and final word out of your mouth with every discussion that we have in this country. And my God, somebody threatened to kill the dude over his weather forecast. Yeah. What kind of country are we living in? I mean,
that's what happens when, you become frightened and angry and think that you should take matters into your own hands. That's what happens when you think that there are conspiracies out there, trying to shut down the oil industry or take away your guns. It's so funny because, Obama didn't take away anybody's guns.
No.
But the narrative is still, oh my God, Obama's going to take away your guns. He never intended to take away anyone's guns, really, just to maybe stop people who the sheriff in the county thought, my God, this guy shouldn't have a gun because, he's going to do something stupid. That's how it used to be. I mean, I talked to my sheriff in Story County. It was a good friend of mine. Years ago, we talked about it. And he said, Steph, you can't imagine the people that try to apply for firearms permits that I know are going to do something really awful to somebody or several people. They don't have the authority to do that anymore. And, I think that probably is conservatives and I was a member of the National Rifle Association for many years, but I think they went overboard. They went too far on gun ownership. I still own guns, but when you allow people who are a real threat to society to be heavily armed, you're basically undermining the stability of the society. Not to mention, you're going to have a lot of kids killed and people in Walmart and gas stations and grocery stores shot. And is that what we want? People have to make up their minds on things like that. We can't set the place on fire because we feel really passionately about things. We gotta be a little bit cool and calm and find people that kind of agree with us, but as long as our positions aren't crazy extremists, you don't want to send every person who's in the U.S. without good documents back to Mexico or Guatemala. I mean, that's impossible to do. And most of them are not criminals. Most of them, there are a lot of family members. There are a lot of people in several places where I've lived and where I live. A lot of the people who are doing work that our kids wouldn't want to do, or our grandkids wouldn't want to do, because it's hot and heavy and underpaid and dangerous. They're working hard. And in Florida, really, DeSantis wants to deport everyone who is in Florida without good papers. I mean, it's just stupid, frankly.
It is stupid, and we need the help. Again, it goes back to the affirmative action issue that we talked about. Also, we need them in the universities. We need them to build our houses. We need them to work in our nursing homes, which don't have people and staff in it. I mean, bring them in. We agree on that one 100%. Yeah,
criminals, deport them or jail them, or chase them down if they get into a gunfight with you. I guess but. To start rounding up people, the Florida real estate and real estate, because there are a lot of contractors who are Latinos and Central American and Mexican and Caribbean. The hospitality industry in Florida, which is the industry, mostly huge industry, they are scared to death, because just by DeSantis saying, we're going to round up all the people who are undocumented here and illegal, and we're going to send them back. People are leaving Florida and going to other places to find work. I remember what happened in Georgia. The peach farmers went nuts when Florida decided to go after illegal residents in Georgia, because almost all the people picking peaches and peppers, poison peppers.
Pickle peppers,
almost every one of them was an immigrant, and many of them did not have papers. They came here some other way as sort of refugees or with their families. We are not making many children in this country. Most Americans are not having kids, and the only thing that is sustaining labor in many industries is the fact that people are coming here. Now, they should come here illegally. I totally, absolutely agree. We should make it much smoother and easier for people to go to American embassies and consulates, apply for a permit to come to the U.S. as a resident or as a guest worker, whatever it is, and do it legally instead of crossing the river illegally. But our system right now, our immigration policy is so dumb. The numbers that we admit is small, the services that we have. And I've been to embassies and consulates all over Latin America mostly, and they're not equipped to really service a lot of people and explain to them what they need to do to apply. So we need more legal immigrants. I'll remind you, this, and certainly your viewers and listeners know. I mean, our ancestors in this country, there was no immigration policy. Most of them got on a boat somewhere and went to, Ellis Island in New York or some other places, and walked up to some immigration dude and said, "What's your name?" "My name is Schnicken." "Oh, okay, we'll call you Smith." Because most of the names they gave them were not the names, because they couldn't spell them. They didn't understand what the name was. And then they came here and they worked in factories and in pretty brutal conditions, again, because Americans didn't want to work in those horrible factories, that were hot and dangerous. And so in the past, we then we clamped down on it and passed immigration laws. And especially, when too many Chinese started coming and we didn't like that, we passed some restrictions on Asian immigrants. And so our immigration policy has been going like this, up and down, up and down. Tighten it up, loosen it up. It is not a good thing to have thousands and tens of thousands of people running up to the American border, trying to cross, trying to come in. That is not a good thing. We need to figure out a way to change that. But we need to be smart about it. We need people to work a lot of things in this country that where there are labor shortages. You look at the statistics. I read the Wall Street Journal, among other things, and New York Times, Washington Post, Reuters and whatever. And there are lots of articles about, there are worker shortages. I don't know if you've noticed, still, there are lots of signs that say we're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring. Everybody's hiring. Nobody wants to work. I have I have a friend of mine who yells at me every time I go to the dog park, and he says, Schmidt, he says, the reason we have a worker shortage is because guys like you you retire instead of working, you're making it so hard on us. You should still be working. He's just kidding.
Yeah.
But it is true that we have a shortage because there aren't enough people to want to do a lot of these jobs. So we need to think about that as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned DeSantis because he's a good example of what we were talking about with Putin and Prigozhin. You don't like Trump Republicans? Be careful of what you wish for. This DeSantis dude looks to me like a Prigozhin compared to a Putin. But again, I'm way out here on the left, and I got to move on here. I want to finish this article because
it's pretty interesting. He's gotten elected and then reelected by massive margins in Florida.
Yeah.
On his coattails, Florida is like Iowa. There are no Democrats left down there in Florida.
Yeah, we're blazing red here in the state of Iowa. People don't realize it.
They're just don't seem to know how to reach voters and how to win elections. And it's kind of like Iowa.
I like this close on the article that we were talking about, Doc, and it, for a different reason than what it was intended. But you're right. One of my former students told me recently that the existing agencies could have neutralized those currently criticizing and threatening them. And I would say the Twitter files is what that was all about. But you asked what he meant. He said, Steph, ever watched the movie Enemy of the State or The Bourne Identity or Games of Thrones? That's some of what these agencies could be doing to them right now. I wanted to ask, you mean the agencies could have tied their bloody adversaries to a chair and unleashed the starving dogs to chew off their faces? I didn't ask. He didn't elaborate. The point is that when you want change, be careful what you wish for, which is what we're talking about. But the other part of this is, I just hosted on Jose Vega's show here in the past week or so. Those guys wanted to talk about the JFK assassination. I mean, they're big rabbit hole guys. I mean, you got a conspiracy, they're probably going to be all in for it.
Yeah.
Well, I talked to them about JFK assassination, and they admitted their reference point for the assassination of John F. Kennedy is Oliver Stone's movie. Movie, for God's sake. And I told those guys, Doc, I said, don't you know that a movie maker's primary objective is to make the fantastic seem realistic? I mean, that's what they're in the business of. I mean, you don't get your history and understanding of current affairs from a movie. But just like this student that you were talking about, these guys were young guys that I was talking to. Vincent Bugliosi wrote the definitive work on the JFK assassination, and he said most Americans do get their understanding of American history, unfortunately, not from the university and doc politics. They get it from movies. That's shocking to me. I mean, honest to God, that's hard to believe.
Yeah. Or George.
Yeah, or George, or Podcast By George. I see what you mean. Yeah. I wish more of them would watch. Okay, let me move into this because we got to get going here. God, I can't believe how time slips away. I told you that it would. And we're going to talk about the horse race a little bit. Biden versus Trump.
Yeah.
The 2024 race, a historic number of Americans don't want. And Doc mentioned earlier that, I'm out here on the left. He has to reel me in once in a while, but I'm a big proponent of a third party on ranked choice voting, on doing something different, because this is where we're at, folks. We're dealing with having to choose from people that we don't like or want. Here are the latest numbers. Former President Trump took a 3-point lead over President Biden. Yeah, Trump's winning it right now, although that may not mean that much. But among registered voters in a new survey in a hypothetical head-to-head matchup ahead of the 2024 presidential election. In the Morning Consult poll published Tuesday, 44% said they would cast their support for Trump, while 41% of those said they would choose Biden. Oh, my God. Trump and DeSantis are seen as the two frontrunners in the crowded field of Republican presidential candidates that we've been talking about, seeking the party's nomination in 2024. Biden still holds a substantial lead on the Democratic side. Okay, Doc, I mean, it's hard for me to speak in anything but derision of the current political system that gives us a choice like this. And I'm not going to go into why I'm not supporting Biden and why I could never vote for Trump and so on. But my God, I mean, pull up your hose and grab your nose. This is what we're going to have to vote for again.
Yeah. And I can share something with you that you're not going to like. in most American presidential elections, people say, gee, I wish there was somebody else running. That's the truth. Even, if they then go hold their nose, go vote for, Barack Obama or whoever it is, that's just the way it is. People always think there is somebody a lot better. One thing I would say is that both Trump and Biden, I'm saying, need to shut up. They need to stop talking. They need to stop going out there, because they are going out with 2 feet right in their mouth. And poor Joe Biden just keeps making so many glitches and mistakes and embarrassing things when he goes off script. And I don't know why his handlers either haven't told him, look, this is the script. You're going to stick to it. You're not going to wander off and try to make jokes or say impromptu things. You are going to strictly stay with what we have agreed on, with what we have decided. We'll communicate this. Stay on one issue. Don't wander off to 10 different issues and then get stuck on some impromptu thing that makes no sense. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is somewhat smoother. He doesn't seem as old when he's speaking. His audience loves him to, poke fun at people and joke around and be, quote, strong, which Joe Biden seems kind of weak in some ways. But you can always vote for Robert F. Kennedy if, in the primaries.
In the primaries, yeah, because the Democratic Party is not going to let him out of those primaries.
No, they're not. But the other thing is, who likes him best of all is independent voters. Our big supporting base, I just saw statistics on it a couple of days ago, are independent voters, not Democrats. He's running as a Democrat. So who is there? There's no other choice. In this country, there are only 2 choices: the Democrat or the Republican. Forget about third parties, George. Forget about third parties. Please forget about third parties.
Well, look at it this way now, and Kennedy has already indicated as much, that he may play the role of a kingmaker. I know you know what that means in political terms, but that's something that Bernie would not do. Now, I covered Bernie's kickoff for the 2020 election right here in Iowa. And literally the first sentence Bernie said was, I will support the Democratic nominee no matter who it is when that point gets here. And a lot of people thought, well, okay, that's not that important. It really is important, because Bernie found out in 2016 that they ain't going to let him in. And so when he's not in 2020, if he's going to support the nominee, then what is the point of all of this? Now, Kennedy was just in a town hall covered by News Nation this week, and he said, no, that's not necessarily the case. So here's my thing. Here's my spiel for the third party. The same would be true of Cornel West. If they can just get 5 or 10% of the vote, of the support, hardcore people that will not move and unless their issues get adopted, they can pick something, be a kingmaker on just one issue. Just give us one issue, for God's sake, that the left wants as an example, and insist that there's a pledge in writing from the nominee that they will, with executive action, not with, talking on television, but will do something to bring this one issue into reality. That's what I'm hoping the left will do.
You are such a nice guy, George.
Yeah, I know.
Let me tell you, George.
Yeah.
These guys who run and know that the party, whether it's the Republican or Democratic Party, isn't going to let them in, they're running for other reasons. One of them is ego. One of them is, if you run, you can ask for money. Give me some money so I can run. And they never spend that money. When they're at the end of the campaign, they've got a huge bank account of money that was given to them for the campaign. They don't have to give it back.
And a huge amount of leverage. And Bernie wouldn't use that. He still has an emailing list of, I think, millions of supporters where he could really, but he's a Democrat. He's in the party. So is Kennedy. He says he won't support the nominee. However, he supported Hillary Clinton. He supported Joe Biden previously. Now he's saying he may not necessarily do that. Let me bring this up on screen because I wanted to, because this is a great way of making the point. This is from the great Bill Last Story, and he's been on my show a couple of times now. This guy's really good. His Substack also is something that you want to go out there and get, folks. I mean, subscribe to Doc Politics, and I've had that up several times, steffenschmidt.substack.com. Then subscribe to this guy, Bill Last Story. He says a friend of mine is calling out his progressive friends for saying they'll vote third party in the 2024 presidential election. Basically, his argument is this. We know Biden isn't perfect. He leaves much to be desired, notably in obvious signs of his mental and physical decline. But we also know Trump is a monster. And since Trump and Biden are currently running neck and neck or thereabouts, at least in the polls, the only real choice is to vote for Joe against the monster. In sum, a vote for a third-party candidate of deep integrity and strong character like Cornel West is really a vote for monster Trump. As I told my friend, telling people they're making a big mistake by voting for a candidate like Cornel West, my God, Cornel West is great, is not the most effective way to win their hearts and minds. Probably ain't going to work, folks. Telling them they're throwing away their vote or that they're really voting for Trump is hardly persuasive. In fact, it's alienating and insulting. He says, on so many issues, Biden has reneged on promises or otherwise failed to deliver for the working class. He's not a pro-union president. Did you see the rail strike, folks? He hasn't raised the federal minimum wage. He's failed to deliver on student debt relief that he promised. There is no public option for health care that he promised. He's approved oil and gas drilling in the most sensitive areas. Meanwhile, military budgets continue to soar as the Biden administration postures for a new Cold War with Russia and China. Bill Last Story says, I'm supposed to ignore this woeful record and vote for Joe because Trump is allegedly worse. My friends tell me I expect too much from Biden and the Democrats. They're hamstrung by the Republican. Joe is doing the best he can, that I need to give Joe more chances, and so on. But Joe Biden and the Democrats couldn't even protect abortion rights. Barack Obama promised to codify Roe v. Wade into law as his top priority, but then he abandoned his promise once he took office in 2009. Biden, of course, was his VP and has a long record of being critical of abortion rights. Again, however, we're told that Biden is the best hope for restoring rights that he's never been keen on supporting, let alone protecting and extending. If Biden loses in 2024, this is wrapping it up here, and I appreciate the patience of the doctor. He says, if Biden loses in 2024, let's be clear. It won't be because some progressives voted third party, and it won't be because of Putin or Russia or rigged voting machines or whatever have you. It will be because Biden simply couldn't win enough votes in the right places. Think 2016, folks, Electoral College, the Rust Belt, all that stuff. That's what he's talking about. Because not enough voters believed in him. That's not on people like me. That's on Biden and the DNC. Again, that's from the great Bill Last Story. I thought that was extremely well put. But it strikes home with me, Doc, because I voted for every Democratic presidential candidate since Jimmy Carter. I know you covered that caucus, for God's sake, going back that far. Yep. I'm going to be hard-pressed. I'm not going to say here on this show, but I'm going to be very hard-pressed to vote for the Democrat nominee in 2024 if it's Joe Biden. First time since Jimmy Carter, Doc.
Yeah, you know, the world that we want and wish for is pretty hard to get at, and American politics is pretty complicated. You got to remember that our current president is not a dictator and can't pass laws without Congress, and the reason why he hasn't passed a lot of things and has done some of the things you don't like is because, darn it, there's that Congress there getting in the way and not voting and not willing to support the things that he wants. And you can't just elect the president. You know, this is not Russia. Our president is not Putin, who really, you know, he needs the support of the of the Russian parliament, but he has it 100% because if you don't vote for him, you trip and fall down a staircase or out of a window. And maybe that's what our presidents need to do with members of Congress, is to threaten them more. Lyndon Johnson got a lot of legislation done by being very threatening. There's some pictures of him leaning over. He was a tall guy, leaning over members of Congress who are leaning back looking at him. And he was telling them, you'd better vote for me and for what I want, for my laws and policies. This is a country that is very fragmented. It's not a progressive country. There are progressive places. If you look at a map of the United States, where Democrats are a majority. Wow, most of the country is not Democrat. You look at the color, if they do it in color. There are some progressive places and Democrats on the East Coast, and there's some on the West Coast. And then there are a couple of little dots somewhere in the middle of the country, and that's it. The rest of it is Republican and conservative. Just look what happened in Iowa. Iowa used to be mixed. Iowa used to be a competitive state, Democrats, Republicans taking turns, governor, legislative majority and stuff. And it is no longer that, the Democrats in Iowa, have very little influence over policy. The only thing that's left there is the Iowa Supreme Court, which sometimes disagrees with the governor. But that's true in other places. You look at Florida, you look at Texas, it is not a competitive country. And you may not like Biden, and I hope you like Donald Trump.
Well, and that was the gist of what Astoria was talking about. And I can be guilty of wishful thinking along with the best of them. My wishful thinking would be that the president would choose some executive action type things that he can affect in the arenas of climate, war, and healthcare. Make those changes, make the left cheer, get them to support him at least on those things. And then when the election comes up again in 2024, tell the Democratic Party as an example, look, you got to reelect me if you want to get these things continued past a 4-year term, because as the doc knows, they'll be immediately reversed by Trump or DeSantis or whoever if they get in. So if you like the end of the war, if you like the end of the oil leases, if you like the public option, Medicare for all, whatever it might be on the healthcare thing that I did temporarily through executive action, then you've got to reelect me or reelect my party. But that does not seem the way that we think and do things in this country.
That's a good point, and I think it's an interesting point that you make. If you don't renew the leases, the price of gas at the pump is going to go so high that no Democrat at any level is going to get elected. So you got these draconian choices. You work on climate change and try to go to cleaner energy, but if it costs people so much of their meager monthly income or weekly income, they're going to turn on you. So it's a complicated process. It's not easy being a politician. Everybody thinks it's easy.
Oh.
It's lucrative. There are no politicians who've gone in middle class and come out middle class. They all come out millionaires with 5 houses and other stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing. And LBJ was right at the top of that list. I mean, God, he went to Congress basically penniless, and he retired with the LBJ ranch and as a multimillionaire, and they're still trying to figure that one out. Well, I digress, and I want to give the doc the last word here, Doc, because we've talked about a lot of stuff. Anything here that you want to reemphasize, or just give us a summary here, and we'll let you have the last word, put a bow on this edition of the PBG Liveline.
Well, the problem is that politics is essentially a wrestling match between different interests who have legitimate reasons for wanting what they want. And building consensus is extremely difficult simply because for the consensus for me is somebody else's awful policy. And so it's a hard balancing act, walking a tightrope. The reason we have 2 parties that are now very different from each other. Everybody says, well, Donald Trump turned the Republican Party into the MAGA party. The Republicans were moving in this direction already. And It's just that he essentially put the cap on it and articulated what people who have been voting Republican were feeling and wanting. And the Democrats are struggling between being progressive, because there's a lot of factions in the Democratic Party that are progressive, and we haven't seen Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York much in the news. I think they told her to stay quiet. I haven't seen her much in the news. And conservative Democrats, who the party has largely abandoned. Rural people used to vote for Democrats in some places, but there are other interests pushing on them, and you can't avoid those interests. And it has alienated a lot of people from the Democratic Party. And so you've got two parties that are trying to, glue together diverse groups into enough voters in enough states. And with the Electoral College, by the way, the Electoral College is really difficult. I mean, you've got, tiny little states that have percentage-wise a huge impact on the outcome of the number of electors.
Yeah.
And, those things mean that it's a constant battle to try to please everybody and please nobody.
Yeah, you want to think oligarchy, think Electoral College, think U.S. Senate, think Supreme Court. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Doc, we got to let you go, pal. Thanks again, as always, for coming on another edition of the Podcast by George Liveline. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Folks, I hope you like it. I hope you appreciate having Dr. Politics on. I hope you like the to and fro that he and I have, because I'm obviously left of the Doc's positions. He and I could go around and round about this third-party stuff forever. But if you like Podcast by George, if you like this kind of conversation and dialogue, please go to podcastbygeorge.com and subscribe. It's free. You can get the video live streams by just clicking on the buttons for Facebook and YouTube that are there. And you can also get the long form audio of the podcast on iTunes, the iHeartRadio app, Deezer, Stitcher, Spotify, all of those places at podcastbygeorge.com. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.